Hello everyone, Professor Chrislock here. So I wanted to make an introductory video to liberal internationalism. Really just as a video that goes hand in hand with an introductory international relations textbook. So really just liberal internationalism at the 30,000 foot level to help students, to help students understand different theories in international relations. So we'll think about some of the core ideas and core components in a short video. So really just an introductory to the topic to get us thinking about these different theories of international relations. So the liberal internationalism is not a theory that assumes the world is peaceful or that war can simply be eliminated. When I'm spending time with students like the faculty advisor for the political science club, and when students are talking about different theories, sometimes they critique liberal internationalism as too simple. It's called the idealist form. That they're critiquing it, saying, well, they think they can completely end war, and oftentimes it's much more complicated than that, because instead it starts from a realistic premise. Many of the same premises that realist scholars point to, that the international system is full of anarchy, meaning there is no world government to enforce roles or security guarantees. Liberal internationalists don't necessarily say they're wrong. However, where liberal internationalism differs from realism is how it answers a pretty key and important question. Given anarchy, is cooperation between states possible? And if so, how? So liberal internationalists argue that cooperation is not only possible, but common when states create institutions, follow shared roles, and recognize that long-term stability often serves their interests better than constant conflict. So, liberal internationalism agrees with realism on that basic point, that the international system is anarchic. There is no central authority above states. Each state is sovereign and responsible for its own security. When talking about this in a classroom setting, I have students think about, if there's a crime in your community, who do you call? You call the police, you call the authorities. If there's a crime in a democracy, there's a police force that comes and investigates and hopefully solves the problem. A police force that tries to make sure there aren't crimes in a neighborhood. In the global community, this police force doesn't really exist. There is no central authority above the state. So this is this international system full of anarchy. Liberal institutionalists, however, reject the idea that anarchy automatically leads to endless conflict. Instead, they argue that anarchy creates a problem that can be managed, not a fate simply to be accepted. States still interact repeatedly. They trade, they negotiate, they form alliances, and face shared problems like economic instability, climate change, and security threats. Over time, these repeated interactions create incentives for states to cooperate with each other. The key insight, thus, here is that anarchy limits cooperation, but it does not make cooperation impossible. So at the heart of liberal internationalism is the belief that international institutions do matter. Institutions are not just organizations or buildings. They are systems of roles, norms, and procedures that structure how states interact. Institutions help states cooperate by reducing uncertainty about each other's behaviors, providing information and providing transparency, creating expectations about compliance, and raising the costs of cheating or violating agreements. So by doing this, institutions make cooperation more predictable and less risky. Liberal internationalists do not claim institutions eliminate power politics and power dynamics. Instead, they argue that institutions can shape how power is used. Power still exists, but it is exercised within roles rather than by pure force. So another core assumption of liberal internationalism is that states are not motivated only by military power or survival. States also care about economic growth, access to international economic markets, political stability, international legitimacy, and of course, long-term prosperity. This is where economic interdependence comes into play and is so important. When states trade with one another, their economies become connected. Wars, thus, become costly because it disrupts trade, investment, and growth. Liberal internationalists argue that this creates incentives for peace, not because states are moral actors, but because cooperation can be rational and beneficial in the long run. So in this view, cooperation is not simply about idealism, it is self-interest over the long run. So liberal internationalism places strong emphasis on international norms, shared expectations about the appropriate behavior of states. One of the most important norms in modern international politics is the idea of sovereignty. The idea that states have the right to govern their own territory without outside interference. Closely related is the norm against territorial conquest. The idea that borders should not be changed by force. Liberal internationalists argue that these norms stabilize the international system by defining limits on acceptable behavior. When states violate these norms, the danger is not just the immediate conflict, but the weakening of the entire roles-based system that makes cooperation possible. So liberal internationalism is also closely associated with the idea that domestic political systems matter for international behavior. One influential claim is that democracies are less likely to fight wars with one another. The explanation is not that democracies are peaceful in general, but that democratic institutions will constrain leaders, require public justification for war, encourage negotiation and compromise, and increase transparency. This idea, which you'll encounter in your textbook, often called the democratic peace theory, reinforces the liberal belief that international political structures affect how states behave internationally. So many liberal internationalists' ideas shaped the global system after the Second World War. Instead of relying solely on balance of power, states built institutions that managed conflict, promoted economic cooperation, encouraged collective security, and embedded power within roles. So this system is often called the roles-based international order. Liberal internationalists acknowledge that this order has been uneven. It's certainly imperfect, and it has sometimes been violated. But they argue it has helped reduce major power war and provided a framework for cooperation for decades. So, to clarify the theory, it helps for us to contrast it with realism. Realists argue that power and survival dominates international politics. Institutions reflect power rather than constrain it. And cooperation is temporary and fragile. So liberal internationalists respond to these criticisms and these claims by saying, sure, power does matter, but it is not everything. Institutions can change incentives and change behavior. And cooperation can persist even when power shifts. So this disagreement is not about whether power exists. It is about how much room there is for roles and cooperation to shape outcomes. So when we think about why liberal internationalism matters for today's world, liberal internationalism remains important because it helps us explain why states invest in international organizations, why diplomacy and sanctions are used instead of immediate war, why legitimacy in international law do indeed matter, why cooperation persists despite rivalries. So whether the liberal international order is strengthening, weakening, or transforming is one of the central debates in international relations today. Understanding liberal internationalism gives you a framework for analyzing how states attempt to manage conflict, not by eliminating power, by embedding it within roles. So this big takeaway for you as students to think about is that liberal internationalism argues that even in a world full of anarchy and a competitive world, cooperation is possible when states build institutions, follow shared roles, and recognize that long-term stability can be more valuable than short-term power. Thank you.